Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today on troubleshooting your DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion team. Really excited to have you here with us. Just so you all know, we will be sending out the slides and recording of this webinar to everyone who has registered. And if you have questions at any time, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And so, as we know, as you all may know, we always start off with a land acknowledgement. It's important that we take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of the lands that we are on, even though we're meeting in a virtual space. We start off this way to express gratitude and appreciation to those territories we're residing on, and as a way of honoring the Indigenous people who've been living and working on our lands from time immemorial. We need to understand the longstanding history that has brought us here and seek to understand our place within that history, whether we came here by choice or we were forcefully brought to this country. And so Healing Equity United is on the lands of the Muwekma, the Ohlone, the Piscataway, and unceded Duwamish territories. It's critical we're taking this moment to recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon Indigenous peoples in the Americas, including their forced removal from ancestral lands and the deliberate and systematic destruction of their communities and culture, which still happens today. Over 100 million Indigenous people were slaughtered in the Western Hemisphere over the past 500 years, and unfortunately, there are only 6.8 million Indigenous peoples left in the US. So please join us in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and the present, and to consider how we are and can each in our own way try to move forward to dismantle the continued oppression of Indigenous communities. We encourage you to take some action by looking up the lands that you're on. We encourage you to educate yourself about the communities who are native to your land, to share your learnings with others, and take action to support those local Indigenous communities when you can. We also invite you now, if you'd like, to honor the lands that you're on by entering their name into the chat. And if you need to look up the lands that you're on, Cassie has also put a link into the chat for you to do so.
Thank you, Jess. And we'd also like to extend our official welcome to you all. Even though we're meeting in a virtual space, we want you to know that Healing Equity United welcomes people of all genders. That includes women, men, trans, genderqueer, or others. We welcome people of African descent, Black, African American, Asian descent, Arab descent, Pacific Islander, or European descent. Those who identify as Hispanic, Latinx, people indigenous to this land, and people of mixed and multiple descents. We welcome all of the languages that you might speak: Spanish, English, indigenous languages, sign language, etc. We welcome people of different class backgrounds, working class, middle class, owning class, or those of us who aren't sure where we might fall on the class spectrum. We welcome people currently struggling to get access to resources necessary for survival, like affordable childcare, affordable housing, and transportation, and those people who currently have more access to those resources. We welcome people with disabilities, invisible or visible. We welcome people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, heterosexual, pansexual, queer, or others for whom none of those labels might fit. We welcome your bodies and the different ways that you might experience yours, including chronic pain, strength, tension, etc. We welcome survivors. We welcome people who identify as activists and people who do not. We welcome the single, the married, the partnered, the dating, those in monogamous relationships, or those in polyamorous relationships. We welcome those who are sexually active and those who are not. We welcome those who are in their teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. We welcome your wide range of emotion regarding issues around anti-oppression and anti-racism. Includes grief, rage, joy and bliss, indignation, contentment, disappointment, etc. We welcome people with different faiths, religious traditions, faith practices, private practices that don't belong to a tradition, agnostics, atheists, and seekers. Finally, we welcome people who have been in spaces and trainings like these in the past and those who have not. So most genuinely, from Healing Equity United to all of you, welcome.
Thank you, Fiona. We'd also like to take some time to acknowledge that May is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. In honoring the cultures and histories of this community this month, it's also important to acknowledge the ways in which white supremacy culture has used the AA and HPI community in times as a model minority, as an attempt to pit people of the global majority against one another, and at other times, scapegoated during times of war, economic downturn, disease, etc. The rise in hate crimes during the COVID-19 pandemic is just one of the most recent spikes in violence and attempted erasure of the AA and HPI community. To effectively disrupt the crisis of hate, we need to bring a broader understanding and awareness to the scope of the problem and to uplift the stories and experiences of the AA and HPI community. We hope that you will make space to have meaningful conversations with the people in your network and consider the ways in which you can leverage your privilege to be in solidarity with this community this month and every month of the year. With that, we'd like to introduce ourselves into the space. Myself, Jess, and Fiona will share some of the identity markers that we come into the space with that informs the work that we do. And so, hi, everyone. My name is Cassie Whitebread. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a queer second-generation Chinese American. I also identify as mixed race or biracial, as I have a white father. I'm originally from the state of New Jersey, though I call the city of Philadelphia home. That's where I went to grad school. I also identify as a first-gen college student. I started my career as a middle school science teacher, and so I identify as an educator through and through. I currently live in Seattle, Washington, with my partner, who is a Black man in social work, and our dog Otis, who is pictured there. And I also wear the hat as an education director for a small nonprofit called Seattle Works. Fiona?
Thank you, Cassie. My name is Fiona Oliphant, and I'll also share some of my identities that I bring into this space, understanding that all of our identities hold some level of power and or privilege, and some that are touched by oppression or impacted by oppression. So I'm a first generation Jamaican American. Folks in my family range from being completely undocumented to being naturalized citizens. And so we've always, or I have always been aware of the barriers and types of oppression that immigrants, particularly those without documentation, face. Having said that, I'm a US citizen. There's a lot of power and privilege in that identity. I can't be deported or removed from the Bronx. That's where I'm going back to New York City, right? And so I always have to ask myself how I might leverage that identity as a US citizen to be in solidarity with immigrants. I am, as you can tell by the scales of justice beneath the American flag, an attorney barred in New York and Washington, D.C. And even though I'm not practicing currently, the ability to put ESQ behind my last name sometimes grants my voice and perspectives and experiences a more valued space amongst certain people, whereas otherwise they might ignore me. I referenced that I'm from the Bronx, which is Black and Brown community, higher rates of poverty, crime, and drug use, and higher rates of love and support. And finally, I'm married to a cisgender white male who is an immigrant from Europe. We have 3 biracial children, the eldest of whom identifies as a Black woman with a white father. Jess?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jess, she, series pronouns. I identify as a first-generation immigrant born in a British colony of Hong Kong. My parents and I immigrated to New York City when I was 4 years old, and they didn't speak any English. They didn't have anything beyond a third-grade education. They worked blue-collar jobs. My mom was a seamstress. My dad worked overnights cleaning the commercial kitchens of restaurants, and I took ESL in elementary school. As soon as I learned enough English, I became the de facto interpreter and translator for my parents, which is something that I still do. Being bilingual is an identity that is rooted in privilege, even though when I was a kid, I didn't really think of it that way. Currently, I live in Oakland, California. And what's interesting is that when I moved from New York City to Oakland, I felt my privilege as an Asian American increase solely because we have more Asian Americans in the Bay Area with more political power. I live here with my partner, who identifies as a cisgender second-generation Asian man who grew up in an upper-class neighborhood. So we have lots of conversations about socioeconomic class and immigration. He's also a community organizer working on civic engagement throughout the state of California. And we have 2 dogs. Hanson, who is pictured above, is my service animal because I live with an invisible disability, even though most people don't know that because I am high functioning. And that can be an identity rooted in privilege or oppression, depending on the spaces that I'm in. And Kobe, who's a dog at the bottom, is my pandemic puppy. And so just to tell you a little bit about Healing Equity United. So Fiona and I have been in the nonprofit sector for probably over 40 years. And regardless of what positions that we were in, whether it was working the front desk or being an intern or a program manager to an executive director of several organizations to serving on boards, what we often saw was that the people that we were serving often didn't look like the people who were making the decisions. They didn't look like the people in leadership, whether it was a nonprofit or even in philanthropy. And so we came together about 5 years ago to form Healing Equity United, which is a women-owned consulting firm. And we focus on supporting nonprofits through building anti-racist and anti-oppressive cultures. We do that through equity audits, workshops, training, coaching, and technical assistance. And so our goals for today, so we're going to recognize different factors that may impact your DEI team, such as power differentials, implicit biases, transparency, and buy-in. Discuss strategies to overcome some of the common pitfalls that halt progress on your DEI team, and share and learn about the next steps forward. And the reason that we have these goals particularly is because we looked at the questionnaire that you all filled out, the questions that you had when you either signed up for this webinar or that we sent you in a different document. But essentially, we want to be responsive to what's going on for you all. And so a lot of things that we heard are going to be brought up in today's webinar. But before we get to that, I'm going to have Fiona share some group agreements because I see that we're engaging with one another in the chat.
Yeah, so we just want to remind everyone that in terms of engaging each other in this space, there's no room for the oppression Olympics in this space from Healing Equity United's approach to the work. All of our oppressions are tied. Therefore, all of our liberation is tied. When we go after each other regarding our oppressed identities or who's quote unquote more oppressed than another, we are not the ones who win, right? So we hope that you agree with us. Hopefully this will be a brave space. We want to see some more engagement, brave questions. We want to see some brave conversation in the chat. We can't guarantee a safe space because when we discuss these topics, there's always the possibility that harm will come into this space. We are asking you to join us in holding us accountable and yourselves accountable and each other accountable. If something harm comes up in the chat or anything that we share, please let us know. Please identify it, interrupt it, mitigate it, and then hopefully collectively we can move forward together. Hopefully, there will be some challenging moments. Hopefully, one of the three of us will say something that makes you say, huh, I don't know how I feel about that. And then you can explore that further. In the chat, please feel free to say it messy. If you have that question or you have that statement, don't, you know, belabor the attempt to make it absolutely perfect, right? I'm not going to check your grammar, right? We just want to get that message out there and have an engaging, robust interaction. Be okay with non-closure. We're not going to solve it all. And if anything is learned or shared that is private in nature, please don't share it outside of this space. What's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here. And as always, please take care of yourself.
Thank you, Fiona. So let's get started. We thought it would be great to start with this quote from James Baldwin. I'll read it aloud for accessibility purposes. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so, as just mentioned, we took a look at all of your responses through your registration in terms of the challenges or barriers that you've been experiencing right now with your DEI teams. And so we're using this time together to face those barriers and try to see if we can figure out what can be changed so that you all can move the work forward. And so, Fiona, I'll pass it over to you just to get us started, just to ground us in the conversation about DEI teams.
Thank you. So we really think that DEI teams are crucial. They can be extremely beneficial to an organization that is attempting to shift the culture. And we know that this work cannot hinge on one person's efforts alone. So when you have like that DEI specialist or the director of DEI, and then you expect that one person to do the logistical, practical policy work in addition to engaging folks, educating folks, empowering folks, and shifting, that just, it seems like a lot. And we've seen very, very high turnover in that regard when those folks aren't effectively supported. And so creating a DEI team can establish an infrastructure within the organization that enhances what possibly that one person could do, right? That the DEI team could take on so many different components of the work, and it can review policy, it can support decision making, it can engage folks in those cultural conversations, it can provide resources and support in terms of really cultivating enhanced understanding of the vast scope of DEIB issues. So, you know, just by creating an effective DEIB team, it really can go a long way in establishing an internal structure for said organization. The members of the DEI team can also be culture carriers, right? Because their commitment and passion and understanding of DEIB issues are not confined to DEIB meetings, right? So they're going to go back to their respective spaces, whether that be in the finance department or in the outreach department or in the comms department, and they're going to go back and they're going to talk about these issues. They're going to engage their colleagues in conversations about this. They're going to seek understanding, right, from all of these spaces. And what the ultimate idea is that there's going to be a ripple effect. So in other words, it's not just going to be the DEI team that is discussing and grappling with DEIB issues. It's going to be everyone in the organization because the DEI team members have gone out and spread the word all around. It also cultivates buy-in, right? Like if you have a couple of people at the top who, issue some mandate from on high and say, okay, now we're committed to DEI or DEIB, right? Some folks are like, yeah, and we were committed to such and such yesterday, and we'll be committed to XYZ tomorrow. And so there's not really that sense of like, how much stock am I going to put into this process? How much am I going to value this process? But when you have a DEI team, its team members can really start to show the value of buying into the process and what all folks, regardless of race or ethnicity, can get out of this process. And last but not least, there are many, many more potential benefits, but we're just for these purposes, right? Last but not least, they model the behavior that you want to see, right? They have in the effective DEIB teams, they're having these challenging conversations regarding power, regarding race, regarding ethnicity, around the isms and how they show up. They're having those conversations around how to call each other in, how to hold each other accountable. And by the simple way that they are doing the work and how they are showing up in space, they are modeling the behavior that we hope other staff members are going to carry forward. So some things to consider regarding your DEI team. It's timing. Timing is always crucial. Is it the right time to have a DEIB team? Is the team going to be primed for success right now? Has the organization already generally determined that it has DEIB priorities and will effectively support this team? If there has been significant harm, if the entire organization is in disarray, if you're having a looming financial crisis and the house is on fire, well, timing might not be best to create your DEI team in the midst of all of that, right? So we always want to ask about timing and whether or not the team would be most effective given the context of everything else that's going on within the organization. I just mentioned this in passing, but support is crucial. Does this team have the support of board members, of executive leadership, of managers, right? If I'm going to be a staff member participating in this DEIB team, and I'm going to really make a commitment to showing up and being a thought leader in this space, how is my workload going to be evenly distributed to create space for me to attend these meetings? So how is my calendar going to reflect that there can't be any conflicts with when these meetings are? Is my manager going to be supportive of that, right? Also, it can't be an unpaid mandate. So this can't be something that folks are doing in hour 41 of the work week and on weekends and in the middle of the night, right? This should be the work. This should be a part of their jobs. Resources. DEIB teams that are created and then don't get a dime to do the work, not gonna fly. Not gonna fly, because you need resources to support education. You need resources to support how the information will be shared with the remainder of the organization, right? You need to have, well, I'll just say this. If there is no money dedicated to it, I would argue that it's not valued, right? So if there's not a line item in the budget for it, people don't really have any skin in the game. Commitment, 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 commitment. Um, we often see in this regard that people are really passionate for like 10 seconds, and then some other hot item comes up. And the topic of DEIB and the DEIB team's work gets pushed from the first burner, the front burner, to the back burner, and then off the stovetop entirely and completely forgotten. And so, we always at Healing Equity United say, if this is going to be a commitment, know what you're getting into, right? And it's not a commitment for the faint of heart. It's not a commitment for today or tomorrow. It is a commitment in good times and bad for the foreseeable future. And then also the last thing about things to consider for your DEIB team is the power differentials. So the DEIB team, and we'll get into this shortly about but hopefully should have representation from all over the organization. And given that wide range of roles and responsibilities, you always want to mitigate any power differences and how those might show up on your team. So if the executive director is on the team, then they're not an executive director in that space to quote unquote tell people what to do or to make all of the decisions. They are a member of the team to work collaboratively with everyone else, and they have to act accordingly. Same goes for any supervisors, managers, no space for retribution and things of that nature. So how do you select your team members? I just mentioned one of them. We hope that the teams represent varied components of the organization, especially in terms of roles and responsibilities. We hope that there's a diversity of identities. We gave a very substantive, robust welcoming of all of the varied identities that we all have. So you want to have this as diverse a sense of identities on the team as possible. For some organizations, that diversity is more limited than in others, but you do want to strive for diversity on the team. The team should not be executive leadership heavy or quote unquote leadership heavy, right? Because there is, well, I'm not going to go into that. I want to create time for everybody else and all the other content, but with the diversity of roles and responsibilities, including frontline staff, the process and the identifying of challenges and gaps is enhanced. You always want to have nuanced communicators. So those people who tend to be argumentative and judgmental and shut folks down and are just quote unquote harsh, the DEI team might not be the space for them. Alternatively, those who don't communicate at all, whether that be verbally or written or in body, like in whatever way, that the DEIB team might not be the space for them as well. Because what you want the DEIB team to be able to do is to grapple with some really thorny issues in a thoughtful, impactful way. There should be an application process. We've seen, at least from our perspective, we've seen many instances in which DEIB teams are created with everybody who's interested in doing the work. And sometimes that leads to folks who think they are great allies showing up and might have problematic challenging definitions of what it means to be an ally coming into the space. So you do want to vet the DEIB team members. And there might be, lastly, some quiet or less visible members of your staff who you're like, oh, they are the non-traditional leaders in the organization, or they get this, or they can really be a powerful force in this space. Well, maybe you want to quietly and privately encourage them to come into this space, because they wouldn't readily seek that space for themselves. So those are just some ideas for you all.
Thank you, Fiona. And so let's segue into some of the common challenges that we saw you all note in your registration. The top 4 that we noted: lack of accountability, lack of communication, lack of commitment, white leadership barriers, burnout, and then little decision-making power, which might lead to performative work. And so we're going to dive into each of these, talk about some antidotes to these challenges. So the first one, lack of accountability, communication, and commitment. First and foremost, I think it's really important to name the thing as a group. If you're having problems with these things, you need to address it, right? If it's been tough to get in communication with each other, name that. Take some time to renorm on communication preferences. If y'all aren't able to talk, y'all aren't going to be able to do the work, right? Take some time to check in with one another. Is the time, location still working for everyone? Question, does the team have an agreed upon set of core values that's driving the work? What's the culture of the team? How are people in relationship to one another? How do people relate to one another interpersonally? Are there, interpersonal issues that are preventing the work from moving forward that would really help to kind of pause, address those before moving on, right? Consider, how do you hold each other accountable to doing things, right? For example, do you have a culture where people can call each other in or out without judgment and shame? Take some time to remember why this work is important. Chances are, as a nonprofit, which I'm assuming a majority of y'all might be a part of, all of our work is connected to racism, oppression, et cetera, in some way or another. And at the least, your organization is made up of a team of people. And therefore, this work is for everyone, right? Doing this DEI work is for everyone. And it needs to be embedded in all facets of the organization, both internally and externally. And specifically around accountability, if you haven't had a conversation around what it means to hold your DEI team members accountable to the work, figure out that process. What does that look like? If you don't have that process down, folks will be grasping at straws when issues around accountability arise, right? That's where we get some conflict. And so it's also important to consider how feedback is given, right? If you haven't established that, that would be a good place to start in creating those methods of accountability. Being able to openly call each other in and out when that work isn't getting done, or when we're not doing what we said we were going to do. Moving on to the next one that we noticed from your responses, white leadership barriers. That was a very common one. I think the first thing that's really important to consider is white fragility coming up, right? Are white identifying folks in leadership positions, coming up against this fight, flight, freeze response because of their privileged positions? And are they conscious of it or not? Do they know that they are having that moment, that kind of response? Question, are there other fragilities that might be coming up, right, around maybe professional education or other privileged identity markers that those folks in leadership might be holding? It's important to consider who can be a white leader co-conspirator. So maybe your ED, maybe your CEO is the person who's blocking, creating some barriers to moving this work forward. But is there maybe an operations director who also identifies as white and is committed to doing this work, who might be able to have a conversation or two with the ED or CEO who is not brought in? And we say that so that the work doesn't necessarily fall on the shoulders of BIPOC and people of the global majority, which so often in DEI work it does. Which brings me to the next, the last bullet point here on the slide here, creating racial affinity spaces. Again, in order to avoid the emotional labor falling on people of the global majority, to push white leadership to do the work. So take some time in racial affinity spaces during your DEI team meetings. And in those spaces, talk about how you can, as a DEI team, strategize to calling your white leadership in. And again, questioning who in the room, who on the DEI team already is a white leader that could potentially do that work so that BIPOC folks do not have to. Moving on to the next theme, we saw burnout. Folks are getting tired and engaging in this work. And we recognize engaging in DEI work requires a significant amount of time, energy. It requires resources, as Fiona had mentioned earlier, particularly when trying to address systemic issues that have probably been ingrained in your organization for a long time, right? It's in society. It's the water that we're swimming in. White supremacy culture is the water that we're swimming in. And so this is an uphill battle. And so it's okay to take moments to pause for moments of relationship building and connection. I think it's important to note that we're more likely to be bought into the work when we know our colleagues and when we see them for their humanity. And so know that it's okay to take that pause. Take some time to build up team resilience. Building resilience can involve cultivating a growth mindset or norming on a mindset of continuous learning. This is also important so that folks can kind of navigate the emotional challenges of doing DEI work to avoid burnout in the first place. And I think it's important to note too, for white folks on the call, you have a privilege to be able to disengage from this work, right? Whereas people of the global majority on your team, people of the global majority on this call, this is what we're living into. This is what we experience in our day-to-day. We don't have the privilege to be able to check out from that. So how can we all, depending on our identity markers, manage our stress and incorporate positive coping mechanisms to be able to push ourselves in this work? Take some time to find your support systems outside of the work to sustain you, that community of people that can provide you support and encouragement. This can include colleagues, mentors, or friends who are also engaging in DEI work. And it's also important to seek out allies who can provide support and advocate for the DEI work within the organization. By building that support system of individuals and organizations, you can feel more connected, so you're not feeling as isolated in your specific work at your organization. And I think it's also important, in pushing this work forward, know that you can't do it all at once. Again, after all, we are operating in white supremacy culture where those of us who are in nonprofits are operating within the nonprofit industrial complex. And so when you are working on your action steps as a team, make sure that those items are realistic for what is on people's plates, and take some time to celebrate the wins when you do meet those action items. And again, last but not least, this last item on the slide here, again, burnout is going to look very different for BIPOC folks, usually because they hold a lot of emotional and psychological burden in pushing this work forward, while also living this experience in the day-to-day. And so, we've often heard white folks saying that they're tired, when in reality, those folks of the global majority are always tired. We are always experiencing this. And so when we need to acknowledge how burnout will look different for different folks, and white folks. Step it up. We need our allies. We need our co-conspirators who may not be experiencing the microaggressions, overt, covert racism in the day-to-day at our organizations. Jess, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, and so we wanted to just share with you all what happens when all else fails. And so one is, thinking about the lack of decision-making power, right? That's one of the things that we have often heard about in committees, like who actually gets to make the decisions. And so, let's face it, the core of creating inclusive culture change is the power to make decisions that will shift policies, practices, and in turn, the overall culture of the organization. And so, there's sometimes lack of clarity about who makes a decision and who's going to hold leadership to it in a hierarchical structure, right? The question is really within your committee, how is decision-making happening now? Is it consensus? Is it majority decision-making? And then the other thing that we often sometimes hear is whether something is a decision or a recommendation by the committee. And so, in the chat, in the Q&A, someone asked earlier about whether we should have an executive director on the committee. And the response was really, you should have someone on the committee who is high up in leadership, who has a bird's eye view of the organization, but whose job is also to bring back what is happening on the DEI team to the leadership and really advocate for it and push for it, right? And so if your organization is small, it could just be the ED. It could also be a program director. It's someone essentially who has that bird's eye view and has that power on the committee. And then when all else fails, we can go to the next slide. One of the things that organizations might want to do is to consider bringing in a third-party consultant. Now, we've worked with organizations who've done this, and sometimes what happens is that depending on who your leadership is or your board, sometimes they hear things differently from a third party because they're not ingrained in your day-to-day work. It could also be, finding allies in your community. Who are the people who are a little bit more hesitant to do this work or resistant to do this work? And who do they listen to? So for example, if you have a white leader who might be creating that barrier, are there other white leaders in your community that your white leader respects, whom they would listen to? Do you have allies that you can bring in from the board? And then lastly, the other question that we sometimes get is, well, should we restructure our DEI team? And I'm going to pass it over to Fiona to talk about when is it appropriate to restructure? And how we might go about that process, because the reality is sometimes a team that we've originally created may not be the best team for what's happening in your organization in the moment.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful setup, Jess. So we come from the space of DEIB work is an ongoing journey of evolution. And what we created yesterday or last week or last year or the last decade may not serve us effectively today. And so it is always good to reassess where the DEIB team is in its current manifestation and not be afraid to shift how it does its work and how it's comprised. I'm not saying to do this every 6 weeks, right? Like you don't want to create instability. But if, for example, the initial DEIB team was created with all volunteers and only the white folks volunteered to be on the team, right? Because all the folks of the global majority were like, nah, I think I'll pass. I'll pass on this one. I'm a little tired on this issue. We'll see what you all come up with first, right? Well, that kind of team does not have the rich, diverse membership and voices, experiences that one would hope, right? So you might want to reconfigure in that way. You might want to have the applicant. So again, folks all volunteer, but they're all the call out passionate people. They're the burn it down people. They're the people who, cut ties and shut down conversations and don't, well, maybe that group of folks are not the most effective culture carriers, or they're carrying the wrong culture, right? So in other words, I don't think that we should be afraid to have conversations around whether or not DEIB teams should be reconfigured. Particularly if folks are not showing up in the way that models a true understanding of DEIB and all of the tenets that are associated with it. Jess, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
And speaking of questions, we're actually going to be opening it up to questions now. And so please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. You can submit them anonymously if you'd like. And yeah, we'll give you some time to do that. But while we're waiting, we're going to go through, there's already one question in the Q&A that's here already. And I'll just read it out loud for accessibility purposes. It says, our team is in the planning stages of our commitment to be developed into strategic planning and tactics. Can you give advice on how to brainstorm ideas that will have lasting buy-in from leaders and personnel in a bureaucratic organizational lens? Fiona, do you want to start?
I'm still parsing the question. So Cassie or Jess, if you want to, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm also kind of parsing out the bureaucratic organizational lens piece. I think one thing that comes to mind for me is if I'm understanding this question correctly, what are the ways in which all folks in the organization are being evaluated on how their commitments to DEIB are being fulfilled in the organization? And so do you have a section in your performance evaluations to talk about that in terms of the individual work that's getting done by individuals on the team? I think that would be one way to create some buy-in to doing this work, not only from leaders, but also from all members of the staff. Jess and Fiona, what's coming up for y'all?
So yeah, I think while I was trying to take apart the question, I think what led to some of my confusion is a DEIB's team's work is both internal and external, and then even outside of the organization in terms of supporting what the organization does outside of its immediate confines. And so when it says our commitments to strategic planning and tactics, I was lost in our commitment as in the DEI team, our commitment as in the organization, or our commitment as in the organization's relationship to the external world. In any of those spaces, I don't think that the decision making should be limited to the ideas that are manifested within the team. So yes, the team can take the lead in that, but why not? And we worked with several clients that opened it up to the entire staff, had a presentation of what they're looking to get, some of the ideas they currently had, what their ultimate goal was, and then they set up an online platform for other staff members to contribute ideas. So, I think that is more helpful, or at least one approach to garnering buy-in. It's like ensuring that there are more and more people, as many people as possible, involved in the process and understanding the distinction of the spaces. Is this a decision or strategic plan for just the team, the organization as a whole, or the organization in its external work?
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. What is your advice? What is your advice to when we are in DEI committees that are heavily attended by leadership?
I would just say that for anybody who's on this call and you have the recording, you may want to share it with the team and the leadership. Then, you know, it is not you saying, hey, leadership, y'all need to make space. It's us. Look, it's not that leadership is quote unquote bad. It is that there is a power shift that happens when a significant number of organizational leaders come into this space, which sometimes limits and detrimentally impacts the honest and robust contributions of others. So that's, you know.
Thank you, Fiona. Next question, how do we bring these principles to universities that are facing increasing polarization? How can folks of color protect themselves in institutions that provide no safe spaces?
Cassie, you want to take that on as the educator on our team?
Sure, yeah. I think this is where the importance of those racial affinity spaces come into play, especially in a polarized campus. I think it's important to create those spaces where folks of color, BIPOC folks, people of the majority can come together, lean on one another, have some time for self-care without being in, you know, the polarized space, without being in spaces with the white gaze. And talk about what it means to sustain themselves in the work. Fiona, Jess, I'm curious if there's anything you'd like to add there.
No, thank you, Cassie. So there's a couple of questions just around the calling in folks and folks who are causing harm. So I'm hoping that we can move to that for a moment. The next question I'm going to ask is also related to universities. So I work in a higher ed institution library on the campus of a minority serving institution. We tout EDI in our values and programming, but not in our policies and practices. A colleague recently quit the library EDI team because of this. Question is, do you have any ideas about how to confront the individual and systemic barriers that exist in university environments when less progressive tenured faculty have an outsized voice in university policymaking?
So that's something that we are grappling with, I think, as a nation, as a society, where there's a small group of folks who are very strident in their perspectives and not willing to engage in conversation. We always tend to say that we like to meet people where they are and start a conversation seeking to understand where folks are, and then engage and empower and call in those people. I have a very, very rigid line in the sand of folks who deny my humanity. So I'm still working on that part. As long as you all fall short of that, then I believe that conversation and engagement and eventually shifting is possible. Cassie, did you have anything for that?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll add to this, when it comes to higher ed institutions, the folks that the institutions are serving are in this situation from this attendee minority serving population of students. And so that is who the institution is meant to serve. And so there is some power within those students that are attending this university. And so what do the students want? Is this something that is okay with, the student population? How can you bring those folks into the conversation, bring them a seat at the table to help push for more changes that are actually within, policies and practices?
So then can you talk about what it looks like if someone is inappropriate on a DEI committee and they need to be removed? Or when someone applies to be on it and are rejected? Fiona, this one might be for you.
All right, so there are a couple of different pieces to that. One, I don't think that removal necessarily is the first step. I think that if a DEI team has created an effective accountability culture, then removal might not be necessary. It can be calling folks in. It can be having those tough and challenging conversations around, hey, so this is how your approach or understanding of this is detrimentally impacting others. And, it is exploring the ways in which you can get that person and that individual to shift. But if the person causes harm and the rest of the team is letting it slide, then the accountability, from my perspective at least, is on the rest of the team, right? Like we have to hold each other accountable. We can't just say, oh, so and so didn't mean it. Oh, you just don't understand. That's how so and so speaks, right? Because what's the point of having a team? Now, when it comes to removal, everybody should be clear. If you don't make any of the meetings, you don't contribute. When you contribute, you're ornery and offending everybody, you're out of here, period, end of story. I don't care who you are. Executive director, frontline staff, you're out. Right, so for me, removal is quite clear. What happens is people usually get like, oh, we don't want so-and-so to get angry at us. Nah, forget all that. You're out of here. In terms of those who don't make the team, it's not a one-time opportunity. People who are members of the DEI team should not be on there for the next 100 years. They should be cultivating the line of succession in other staff members. And so you didn't make it this time. Thank you for your interest. Here are the ways that you can continue to educate yourself and empower yourself. And here's the next time we're going to have open applications.
All right, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Cassie. I'm sorry if you didn't get your questions answered, but Cassie will be putting up our contact information on a slide in a moment so that you all can contact us if you have additional questions or anything like that, or want us to come in and support you all. And so Cassie?
Yeah, thank you, Jess. From Healing Equity United, we just want to thank you all for being here. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy days to join us for this webinar. Again, as Jess mentioned, our information is up here on the slides. We know we didn't get to every single question here, but if you would like to potentially explore how to further your work with us, please feel free to reach out. Contact information is there, and we hope to see you at a future event soon. Thank you all.
We have 2 future events coming up. We'll put the links into the chat. One is a book babble about Yellowface, and then the other one is a training specifically for anti-racist boards. We'd also appreciate it if you could take a moment to complete an evaluation, which I've also just put the link into the chat. And we will email you the recording as promised. Thank you all so much, and we hope to be in touch soon. All right. Bye, everybody.